With election day ahead, some security experts are concerned about the potential for political violence. This includes our next guest, Dean Jackson. He's a former analyst on the House committee that investigated the January 6th insurrection. He's also a non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council's Digital Forensic Research Lab, and he joins me now from Cleveland. Dean, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Dean, I want to talk to you about this election. This is the first election since the world as Americans know it changed on January 6th. Do you think U.S. security officials have done enough to prepare for the potential threat of violence this time around?
I think that on the ground, security officials have done a better job preparing than last time. I think they're determined not to be caught unawares again. You saw that with the federal government declaring the January 6th certification by Congress, for example, a high-level national security event. You heard it from officials on the ground just a moment ago in your own broadcast. On the other hand, the thing that concerns me is that the federal government has taken a step back in its efforts to respond to conspiracy theories about the election, rumors of voter fraud, and even purposeful false claims by candidates trying to undermine faith in the election outcome. In 2020, there was a quite robust effort between the federal government, independent university researchers, and social media companies to track those rumors, to put out corrections, to send alerts to local officials so that they knew what people were saying online, and of course to monitor for potential threats of violence. And as a result of political pressure from lawsuits and from congressional investigations and claims of censorship among the American right, many of those efforts have been rolled back or dismantled. And so we actually, in many ways, I think, are less prepared for the threat of online organizing around election conspiracy theories that could end in violence.
Well, this is what I wanted to ask you about next. And thank you so much for really delineating between the actual physical violence and online conspiracy theories and organization online. The Stop the Steal movement is alive and well, especially on social media. And this election has not even happened yet. The election day has not happened yet. And there are people, our reporters have interviewed some of them, who have already said, if Donald Trump does not win, I will be sure that this election was once again stolen. What accounts for just the persistent growth of this movement and the fact that it's still around all these years later?
The campaign to undermine faith in the 2024 election began 4 years ago. We've seen that belief that that election was rigged and that future elections would be rigged, and an unwillingness to believe that elections that Republicans lose can possibly be legitimate. That's become an organizing principle of the Republican Party. Republicans who refuse to at least pay credence to that idea lose primaries. They can't win the support of their base. And so really what you see through right after the 2020 election, the 2022 midterms, to today is an effort to lay the groundwork to question the results of this election. And you see the fruits of that labor in polling that shows that a majority of Republican voters do expect to see fraud. And online, of course, even before early voting starting, because after all, millions of Americans have already voted, people were talking about the threat of, hundreds of thousands of undocumented immigrants voting in an American election, which, if you know anything about the infrastructure of election administration, simply it isn't possible to do at that scale. There are so many safeguards in place. And so they're not waiting for voting to start to cry foul. They're setting up the stage to question the results after the election.
I want to talk to you about Elon Musk. He created an election integrity feed on his social media platform X, formerly Twitter, which has been, of course, the home to many of these conspiracy theories. How has Elon Musk's growing involvement with Donald Trump changed the landscape of this election in terms of that, sowing the seeds of doubt that the electoral process is working fairly?
Well, Elon Musk has tweeted hundreds of times about election fraud over the last year. If not his most discussed topic online, certainly one of them. And the election integrity unit you describe was set up by a political body he funded And really what he's done is created a safe space for election denial online. Other social media platforms like Facebook or Instagram or YouTube, they have rolled back some of their policies around election denial. And it's concerning because they're clearly trying to take a neutral stance. They're afraid of courting controversy. Elon Musk has really leaned into this. He's championing the cause of election denial. He's become one of its chief proponents. And there's a lot of fear that if the election is very close and we see any kind of instability or unrest after Election Day, that Elon Musk will use X as a platform to worsen the situation, similar to the way that he was accused of doing during riots in the United Kingdom, when he said that the country was on the verge of civil war, and the government reacted quite strongly to that statement. So there's a lot of fear that Elon Musk's purchase of Twitter and conversion of that platform into X wasn't as much a business decision as a political one, that he was preparing to have a powerful communications asset for specifically this moment.
Dean, while we still have you, I just want to ask you one final question. If we're going by what the polls are telling us, this will be an incredibly tight election. It may take several days, maybe even weeks, to declare a winner, hopefully just days. What do you predict in the days to come in terms of violence and unrest? Do you believe that we will be seeing physical violence? We've already seen some boxes, ballot boxes be set on fire. We've seen houses and businesses being boarded up in Washington, D.C., a kind of images just inconceivable 10 or 15 years ago. Do you think we're going to see violence in the days to come, especially if it takes a while to tabulate the results?
I think the closer the election is, the more likely violence becomes, especially if there are delays in the count. If it's close in Pennsylvania, for example, Pennsylvania isn't allowed to pre-process mail-in ballots, so it always takes them a few extra days to announce an official result. And we know, of course, that because election deniers have joined county and state election boards, they're prepared to delay certification process if they're given a reason to do so. And so what really worries me is that there will be organized violence, not spontaneous violence, not lone wolf violence in places like Washington State, where ballot boxes were burned, and that's quite troubling. But Washington State isn't expected to be pivotal in this election, and many of the voters whose ballots were destroyed, of course, were contacted. They were able to cast new ballots. It's still troubling. Some of them probably will not be able to, but they're able to vote in person. What worries me is a more organized, systematic attempt to throw the election off kilter in places like Pennsylvania or Georgia. Large crowds showing up, maybe armed, to vote tabulation centers where ballots are being counted and processed, for example. If something like that were to happen, and we saw similar efforts to disrupt vote counts in the 2000 election in Florida, but this time it could be much angrier. There would be many more guns, and it wouldn't take much, one heated confrontation ending in a gunshot, to really light a spark that could set things ablaze. And so we will see some form of protest and unrest no matter what happens, I'm sure. Whether it tilts into violence, I'm hesitant to predict, but the closer it is, the more I will be worried about that. And just today in the New York Times, there were reports of unencrypted messaging apps like Telegram, far-right groups once again talking about where they need to be, what they need to do, the stakes of this election, and thinking about showing up at polling places, at vote tabulation centers. So all of the groundwork is laid for there to be violence. Only time will tell if it comes to pass.
And an ominous prospect there, but I really do appreciate your insight and you sharing with us what you see as a strong possibility. Dean, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
That was Dean Jackson. Dean is a former analyst on the House committee that investigated the January 6th insurrection, and he joins me from Cleveland.